Well, thank you very much, Patrick, for inviting me. Can you hear me okay?
We certainly can, yes. Okay.
Lovely. Well, it's great to be speaking for the first time on Worldwide Wednesdays and even to kick off the show. The topic today, can the UK and the EU survive great power rivalry, hits the nail right on the head. It relates to the geopolitical realignment taking place in the world as part of the historic cycle of the rise and fall of great powers. It's a realignment that is leading to a clash of interests and values. It will not necessarily be a peaceful realignment. It must be managed by us as best it can. This realignment is impacting on relationships across the world in Asia, Latin America, Middle East, Africa. The rise of China is especially causing multiple realignments as countries position themselves to take advantage of the opportunities they may bring while shielding themselves against the threats. I was recently invited to Israel to see how Israel might create a strategy on China. Israel is trying a balancing act between an economically important China and its security alliance with the United States, which wants Israel to stop selling high-end technology to China. President Xi was visiting the Gulf at the time. China had just brokered a deal for diplomatic ties to be restored between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Yet the USA remains the #1 security partner in the Middle East region. The desert sands are shifting and all the Middle Eastern countries are trying to balance their interests. The game for smaller countries seems now to try and avoid being reliant on any single camp. They want to be courted as far as possible by all sides, everywhere there are dilemmas, how to play the game best. By 2075, a recent study showed the three main global economic players are predicted to be China, United States, and India. Their GDPs in 50 years' time will be surpassing $50 trillion each, the main players being China, United States, and India. The EU will be next largest at about $30 trillion. Other countries, including the UK and Russia, lag far behind. So I will say that the EU is therefore perhaps heading towards becoming a strong second league major world player rather than a great power, strong enough to look after itself if it can act united for the common good with determination and wise leadership. As long as the UK aligns itself as closely as possible with the EU, with the hope of rejoining one day when it can convince the EU it can be a responsible member state, the UK should aim to rejoin the single market to benefit from the EU's economic weight to remain a major world player as part of the collective whole. What are the essential 5 factors then for the UK and the EU to survive great power rivalry? Well, first, the UK's and Europe's unique selling point must continue to be as the world bastion of universal values: freedom, rule of law, democracy, and respect for human rights. Our USP still remains highly attractive to the majority of the people around the world. With uncertainty as to the future course of US politics after the 2024 presidential election, Europe must remain the world's focal point on values in this respect. The UK's soft power can be very helpful here. Meantime, we must do everything we can to ensure we keep homegrown populism at bay. However, the projection of those values will need to be much more subtle, targeted, and seen to apply to all countries the same way. We should not be perceived to preach, as many in the world are now vociferous about the West's own perceived shortcomings. This is part of the reason why we are not sufficiently winning the argument on Ukraine with the global South. We must overcome, in particular, disinformation, which calls into doubt our values, such as the widespread anti-colonial narrative engendered by Russia in the global South, and even which has spread within our own societies. Secondly, Europe must act together with greater resilience and unity. This is the famous strategic autonomy espoused by President Macron. But let it be clear, that does not mean being anti-United States. It means making our minds up for ourselves and then deciding which partners are best to pursue each interest. The exception at the moment is our security and defense, which makes the US currently the indispensable partner of the UK and Europe. As we cannot predict the reliability of the United States to continue that role forever, it is absolutely imperative that Europe does create its own capacity to act independently within NATO for as long as the US remains committed to transatlantic security and outside when EU and UK interests demand of it. The UK's substantial security and defense know-how should be a vital part of that. And UK and France have veto-wielding permanent seats, which will need to be preserved in any attempt to reform the UN Security Council. Thirdly, we are lucky, for the time being at least, that upcoming global powers are not very united in pursuing their goals together. So, for instance, what's called the BRICS formation, which is a formation consisting of Brazil, China, India, Russia, and South Africa, that are due to meet very soon again, they recently surpassed the G7 countries in the size of their combined GDPs, but they're a disparate lot. India is in dispute with China over their borders, while being heavily courted by the United States. It is not clear where Brazil, under President Lula, aligns on many issues yet. South Africa is sadly, if not irrevocably, in the China-Russian camp for now. So Chinese President Xi may have told, or did tell, Russian President Putin in March this year, quote, "Right now, there are changes, the likes of which we have not seen for 100 years, and we are the ones driving these changes together," end quote. Of course, Russia and China's paramount interest is to weaken the United States and the West in general. Yet China is at the same time squeezing all it can out of Russia economically, while expanding its influence in Russia's Central Asian background. They also have a long common border, which has been the focus of dispute historically. In all this, India can be called currently the swing state, with interests both in having good relations with US and Europe, and also in the Russian camp at the same time. However, it's in conflict with China over its border. Vying for India's support would, of course, be a major part of the new game. Fourthly, we need to be much more flexible in dealing with countries in the global south, which are not wanting to take sides in this evolving world order. We in the West changed our rhetoric some time ago with the global south, calling them partners. But we need to be really now working with them as partners, listening and trying to meet their needs much better. Whilst it would be foolish for the West to try and match China's infrastructure building Belt and Road Initiative head on, simply because we don't have the resources or the ability to coordinate properly amongst ourselves, the West needs to assist countries in the global south, especially with their digital highways and technological development, giving them the skills to become prosperous by themselves. Because many times they say now, of course, we don't want your assistance, we just want access, equal access to your markets. So this work that we do, which is outside just development assistance, it should be supplemented by numerous trade deals in different sectors, matching more closely the needs of the global south. Donor countries and NGOs would be much more effective if they coordinated rather than competed with each other. And fifthly, and lastly, if we want to keep the current world liberal order, our existing multilateral institutions should be more representative of evolving new power structures. This would mean the West would no longer be the top dog at the table at the World Bank and IMF, for instance. However, other countries would feel they have more ownership than in the current international system and stick with it. This is preferable to the global south signing up to Chinese-led initiatives such as the Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, and other Chinese global Tom Cobley and all initiatives, which aim to overturn the current world liberal order and create a new or competing international system based on an authoritarian model. The concern would be that too many players becoming involved could render the decision-making process unmanageable. Such a reform of multilateral institutions would be and is very difficult to achieve. The United States would not wish to shed its de facto control of the World Bank, nor Europe its chairing of the IMF. And there would be the danger that China and Russia would try to ride both horses, increasing its power in existing institutions while continuing to pursue its agenda of turning the international system into a more authoritarian model. Despite many declarations of the need to reform the system, it looks very hard to put it into practice. To conclude, a lot depends ultimately on the quality and nature of world leadership. We would surely all welcome China's rise if it was democratic and peaceful. But authoritarian leaders, such as President Xi Jinping, are obsessed with going down in history as great leaders, oftentimes irrespective of the human cost. Neither can we be certain of the United States after 2024. The UK and Europe need to be able to look after themselves. For that to succeed, the EU countries and its neighbours must draw closer together and truly pull their sovereignties to ward off the predators. Can we produce the leadership capable of achieving that? The jury is out. Thank you.